I can think back to a time when I was a little kid. I mean, hell, in retrospect, it doesn't seem like a crazy long time ago, but there were three things that I loved that I could associate with my childhood: music, cartoons, and video games. More specifically, I remember the first time I ever played a game online with another person. And I'm gonna put that game on screen in a second, but right now I want you to think of the first time you played a multiplayer game and comment that down below. Alright, so my first multiplayer game I ever played was Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 3 for the Nintendo Wii. And if I had to try to read your mind and guess what you're thinking, it'll probably be something like,
hey yo, what the fuck?
Nah, but for real though, the Wii was my first actual console I had to myself. Before that, I was playing on my sister's Sega Genesis, but nonetheless, that experience was pretty riveting to think that there was someone on the other side playing against me. Incidentally, that was also the first time I was introduced to lag, and I guess you can say that was a less riveting experience. So much so, in fact, I only played for a few days, and then I never touched online on it ever again. A little later on in my life though, once I graduated from the school of Nintendo, I found my love for the Xbox 360, and I was introduced to amazing multiplayer games like Halo 3, Call of Duty 4, and Doritos Crash Course. Games like that, paired with a great online infrastructure, made for some of the best moments of my adolescence. And it always made it better that I had a few friends to play with too. But what I'm really trying to get at is this. There was a formula that Microsoft and Sony laid out for their online infrastructure, and all Nintendo had to do was copy their classmates' homework. I mean, it's not like Sony and Microsoft weren't already doing the same thing as they started to explore the motion control fad, but Nintendo was always that kid known for sticking out from the bunch. So instead of copying the other kids' homework, they just decided to fucking eat it, and then regurgitate that paper ball back up on their desk. That disgusting wet paper ball is Nintendo Online. And today, I want to take the time to research the history of it and share it with you, and I think you might be interested to know what I found. But before we get into that, I have to hit you with the casual YouTuber jargon saying that if you enjoyed this video, be sure you like, subscribe, and share the video because it'll help my channel grow. Anyways, let's get into it. Okay, so to really study the history of Nintendo's online service, I went all the way back to 1988. If you're alive, give or take 10 plus years at this point, then you might know this sound. That is what the internet sounded like back then, and the first time a Nintendo system was able to use it was the Nintendo Famicom. Famicom being short for Family Computer, and it was an 8-bit video game console that used cartridges, and it even had an adapter for floppy disks. But the main thing we want to focus on is a peripheral for it called the Family Computer Network System. It allowed its user to access things like the weather, cheats for games, jokes, stocks, and even horse betting? I know, crazy right? I can't even bet horses on my PS4 unless I'm on GTA 5. Granted, this was really only in Japan at the time, but in a way, this was kind of ahead of its time. But the technology wasn't quite there yet. The next advancement was a small service and peripheral called X-Band that was available for the SNES in 1994 in America. For a monthly payment of around $5, you were able to connect to the service and check your mail and play some games with the people in your local area. The reason I'm saying in your local area is because to play with people outside of your area, it costs an additional $4 an hour. And get this, you were able to hold up to a whopping 10 friends on it. Overall, it was a pretty small and forgettable service. It only had around 15,000 members at its peak. But what interested me about it was the fact that it was the only modem peripheral in the States that was actually licensed by Nintendo. But it really wasn't getting any sort of traction. But anyway, let's move on. Okay, I'm gonna run through the next few systems fairly quickly, but the next system down the line is the N64. But we're gonna have to go back to Japan for this one. So in 1999, the Nintendo 64 DD was released, and with it, players were able to do such things as share art from in-game and of course, play online. The problem with this was there was only 9 games that supported it, and it never really picked up any steam due to the GameCube being released less than 2 years after. And speaking of the GameCube, it only had 8 games with online functionality, and apparently Nintendo had no control over the internet services on the GameCube whatsoever. They just left that up to the developers. Okay, now we're gonna move on to the consoles with the most online development: the Wii, the Wii U, and Nintendo Switch. And I'm gonna group the Wii and Wii U into one bunch because the online on them is pretty much the same service. As you could guess, my experience with it was a mixed bag, as I enjoyed downloading apps and demos to try it as a kid, and watching it download was a very satisfying experience. But the only part that I had a problem with was the actual online stability when it came to playing games. But besides that, everything else was great, and also, you can't really beat free. But that leads us to where we are now in 2019, where Nintendo's online service costs $20 a year, and for those $20, you get cloud saves, NES and SNES games, special deals, and an online app for your phone, and of course, access to play with other people. If I'm giving you my honest opinion on the current state of Nintendo Online, I'd honestly say it's pretty bad. Even though it's the cheapest amongst the big 3 gaming companies, it's also easily the worst, and I'll explain why. But before I do, I just wanted to show you this monstrosity that is voice chat on the Switch. Never in my life have I seen such an overcomplicated and impractical setup for voice chat, and the crazy part about it is, games like Fortnite have native voice chat on the Switch, proving that it can work with ease. But Nintendo refuses to implement it into the main UI for whatever reason. Hell, if they just put Discord on the Switch, I'd be more than happy with that. For once, I would really want a Nintendo system to have a voice chat that wasn't straight up garbage. But if we move on to what else they're offering you, you'll quickly realize there is not much else. The only 2 things that matter to me personally is online play and cloud saves. Everything else I could really care less about. I could maybe see myself playing around with the NES and SNES games for all of about 10 minutes before deleting the app. And the deals, well, they're just that, deals. And you'll find a ton of them on the eShop, whether you have a subscription or not. So all in all, I can really only see this being used for people who play Smash Bros. Or any other competitive online game, which if that itself justifies the price for it for you, then go ahead and enjoy it. But for me in its current state, it's straight up trash. To make it more appealing though, I feel like they should give access to systems other than the NES and SNES. I don't speak for every Nintendo fan when I say this, but if a game came out over 20 plus years ago and it's not Mario, Metroid, Zelda, Pokemon, or even some other games in between that are classics, I don't want to play that shit. Like, at all. Nope, I'm good. And I know I'm not the only one that feels this way, so to fix it, they should give some games from the N64, GameCube, hell, even Game Boy. I feel like that would greatly add to a roster of games that are severely lacking. And for crying out loud, can we please get some dedicated service in these games, please? You'd think that if they're charging for it, they'd at least improve server stability, but nope. It's just as bad as the Wii U, if not worse, cause this time, it's coming out of your pocket. The cloud saves are cool though, at least they function. Only for certain games though, so forbid anything happens to your Switch and you pay a yearly fee to keep your save data safe. Nintendo goes, hey, we see all these games you own and we'll back up these for you, but these bunch right here, nah. And I'm just like, what do you mean no? I'm paying you for a service for my protection. And the least you could do is protect all my games. And they're just like, nah, I don't feel like it. And that goes for certain multiplayer titles too, like Splatoon. So if anything happens to that 100+ hour save file, Nintendo pretty much tells their paid user base to kick rocks. Overall, listen, I've used Nintendo systems all my life as a thing to enjoy by myself, unless of course I was playing locally, and I don't know if I see that changing anytime soon. But I would like to see it flourish into a great service in its time, but its time isn't now.
I've been held up in this city for a while due to the rain.